the Southern Poverty Law Center that talks about the timeline for family separations under the Trump administration. I think when people look back on and read the history of the Donald Trump administration, in chapter 1 will be the cruelty of their immigration plans, their immigration program, designed in large part by Stephen Miller, who, as one will recall, was an aide to Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, back when Jeff Sessions was a senator. Just to read just a little bit of what the Southern Poverty Law Center has written about what was done when Jefferson Sessions was the Attorney General of the United States, had the same job as Bill Barr, who's even worse in a lot of ways. The one good thing about Jefferson Sessions is that he refused to not recuse himself on Russiagate, which is why Trump hates him. And Trump is doing everything he can to make sure he's defeated in this primary, which is funny to watch him sucking up to him like, no, I love you. No, you're the greatest president in my whole lifetime. And he's like, you suck. And he's like, no, I don't suck. I really, your friend. Please let me be senator again. Please. And Trump is like, no, I hate you. And he's like, oh, but I love you, Trump. I want to end immigration with you. In 2017, long before the Trump administration implemented, this is the Southern Poverty Law Center, its zero tolerance immigration enforcement policy in 2018. It was already separating children from their parents as part of a pilot program conducted in the El Paso, Texas area and along other parts of the border. Under the El Paso program, begun in mid-2017, adults who crossed the border without permission, a misdemeanor for a first-time offender, were detained and criminally charged. No exceptions were made for parents arriving with young children. The children were taken from them, and parents were unable to track or reunite with their children because the government failed to create a system to facilitate reunification. By late 2017, the government was separating families along the length of the U.S.-Mexico border, including families arriving through official points of entry where they're turning themselves in. On May 7, 2018, a year later, the U.S. Department of Justice announced that it had implemented a zero-tolerance policy dictating that all migrants who cross the border without permission, including those seeking asylum, which is legal, be referred to the DOJ for prosecution. So again, they're making it illegal to seek asylum. So when people talk about this is quote-unquote illegal immigration, undocumented, illegal, no, these are people who are following the law that America set up, that the U.S. led the world in at one point, turning themselves in and saying, I want to seek asylum with my children. And then they are charged with a crime just for trying to get asylum coming from the wrong country, apparently, because you can do it if you get off the plane coming from Ireland. You cannot do it if you're coming over the border through Mexico. Undocumented asylum seekers were imprisoned, and any accompanying children under the age of 18 were handed over to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which shipped them miles away from their parents and scattered them along 100 Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters and other care arrangements across the country.
Criminal.
Hundreds of these children,
Criminal.
hundreds, including infants and toddlers, were under the age of 5.
Again, I think we spoke about this during one of the previous podcasts.
When we talked to Jacob Soboroff.
I still, up to this day, have no understanding of why would they take these people's children.
Oh, I know.
I mean, I'm trying not to be that cynical, but I just can't think of any other way. Okay.
Pick me.
To Reid.
Yeah, thank you very much, teacher. I'm telling you why. You know why? Because A, they wanted to make a deterrent to show you that if you try to come to America and seek asylum, the punishment for you trying to come to America while being brown is that you lose your kids.
But we also now, so the consequences of that punishment is that we take your kids. And we do what with them?
Here's the question. I remember on AM Joy we interviewed a guy from the ACLU who, rather than talk me down from my fear that some of these kids would be adopted out, because there are a lot of parents who want a child and they can't adopt an infant. Well, what if an infant comes right over the border with their mom, is separated, ends up in your house in foster care, and then you want to adopt them? I mean, the reality is, unfortunately, we don't know what happens to a lot of these kids because a lot of them disappeared into the system. A lot of them will languish in foster care, languish in group homes. A lot of them will be deported back without their parents, or their parents will be deported back without them. We have no idea, and this is up to 5,000 children. And as Jacob Soboroff discussed on What to Read, as he's discussed on AM Joy, as he's done in all of these interviews he's been doing about his book, which is called Separated, this is torture according to international human rights organizations.
I don't know how any other way you can describe it.
It's torture. And these kids will never be the same because the reality is if you ever got lost from your mom inside of a store as a kid for 5 minutes, the panic you and your mom both felt, when our kids would run and hide, it is real, and the trauma, as you've seen videos of kids trying to be reunited with their parents, and they don't even want to go to them. The trauma that is inflicted on children who are separated from their parents is permanent.
Well, Joy, let me ask you a question. You think about this, and I'm sorry, this is just bugging me. Just say, I'm assuming there's got to be over 10,000 kids who are separated from their parents.
Well, they think about 5,000, but if there's 5,000, we don't know how many. I'm saying
this is the Trump administration. Let's just double that number, say 10,000
Yeah, we don't
know. I'm pretty sure most of those children are not placed in foster care homes or anything like that.
We don't know.
So exactly. So are they in some kind of secret detention center?
We just don't know.
This is the crime of the whole thing. Why do we not know these things?
That's the thing, is that they didn't keep good records. And I remember when we went to Tornillo and covered that story, the most horrifying thing about it was the fact that they said they had these A numbers where they would give the child an A number and the parent an A number, and then they could match those numbers back up. I never believed it then, and it's certainly not true now. All right, we're going to talk to somebody today about this whole issue of child separation, but not from the point of view of immigrants, because what we forget is that childhood separation is kind of as American as apple pie. We did it to enslaved families. We separated children from parents so they could sell the child this way and the parent that way. We did it to indigenous Americans, where there was a whole series in the 1950s of attacks on Native American communities in which the children were taken from the parents and put in these boarding schools where they were trying to teach them to quote unquote be American. So the United States has been separating children since the very beginning, since the 17th century. However, it's also been done by private entities, not governments. But this is the question of when an entity that claims they're helping families, or that is a religious organization or another kind of cult situation. There's all kinds of ways in which you can wind up being separated from your parent. And today we have a really fascinating guest who has a story of childhood separation, not because of a government, but because of a cult. And this is one of those cases where you realize that one of the powers of Twitter is that you can meet people just by tweeting with them. This is somebody that I only know through Twitter. I've never met this person before. He's not been on AM Joy. He's not been on TV with me. We only know each other because he's one of my favorite Twitter follows. And I retweet him all the time. And so I, quote unquote, know him through Twitter, but didn't even know what his story was. I had no idea until he tweeted about his book. And I'm reading this tweet about his book, and I'm like, wow, that sounds really interesting. So, of course, we decided, hey, you know how you can meet somebody that you want to meet that you only know on Twitter? You invite him on What to Read.
That's about right.
That's what we do.
Him in.
Let's bring him in. Okay, well, you may know him from the Airborne Toxic event. If you are a music listener, you may know him as I met him on Twitter as a really great tweeter who is somebody who I follow, one of my favorite follows on the interwebs. But you also should know that he is a best-selling author. The book is called Hollywood Park. Here is the cover for those of you who are watching us on YouTube. It's a memoir that is really fascinating. And, we were talking a little bit before we went live here that you really don't know much about, the people that you're tweeting back and forth with. But this is one person who the depth and the fullness of the story is actually unbelievable and really incredible. Mikel Jollett, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Joy. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to talk to you.
Great to actually talk to you in real life. This is fun. So
I'm such a fan. I'm just a fan of who you are in the world, and congratulations on your new gig. Well deserved, and it's just a joy to watch your career do well, and it's good to see good people get to have larger platforms. So
you're very
congratulations
sweet.
on that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. All right. Well, I'm going to just jump right in. I'm not even going to wait. I'm going to read the first part of the book for those who have not yet read Hollywood Park. This book is a lot of people I know you're doing a lot of interviews on it because it's a fascinating story. And this is the opening of it. We were never young. We were just too afraid of ourselves. No one told us who we were or what we were or where all our parents went. They would arrive like ghosts, visiting us for a morning and afternoon. They would sit with us or walk around the grounds to laugh or cry or toss us in the air while we screamed. Then they'd disappear again for weeks, for months, for years, leaving us alone with our memories and dreams, our questions and confusion, the wide open places where we were free to run like wild horses in the night. This is a story about childhood separation. It's about cult membership and escape. And it's a fascinating story, and it's your story, Mikel. Tell us about your family and how they got caught up in a cult. The cult is called Synanon, I think. Synanon or Synanon?
Synanon, yeah. So it was called Synanon. It started as a drug rehabilitation society in the 60s. I guess it started in the 50s, but had its heyday in the 60s and early 70s. And it's a place where drug addicts went to get clean. And for a long time, it was thought of as this success story of, during one of the former drug epidemics, which was heroin at that point, where nothing else seemed to be working, and Synanon seemed to have this model that worked. So my father went to Synanon when he got out of prison. He had formed a heroin addiction, and he went there to get clean. And he lived there for a while. I met my mom there. You could say they were star-crossed. My dad was an ex-con who, with like an 8th grade education. All the men in my family are, God bless them, wonderful, smart, industrious, funny people. But I'm the first one to go to college. But they, and my mom was this free speech activist from Berkeley who had participated in the free speech movement there. And so they met in Synanon. And I think for a while it felt like it was a place that was going to change the world. I think they really believed that. And then, of course, as happens with cults, it started to go bad. And the leader was a man named Chuck Dederich, and he started to, I think, had too much power. And they started doing things like breaking up marriages, forcing the men to get vasectomies, forcing the women to get abortions, violence, threats on people's lives for leaving, all this crazy stuff. So into this environment, my brother and I were born. I have an older brother who's 3 years older than me. And I would say the worst and the most difficult, the most vexing and challenging part of it was, at 6 months old, we were all taken from our parents and put into an orphanage. We were raised by different people, didn't really know who our parents were. We didn't know what parents were. And I think at the time they thought of it as like, well, we're not going to pass on our problems to our kids. Yep. And I want to be really clear. None of these are the choices that we made. Yeah, we were just kids. We were just born there. And a lot of my life, you mentioned people don't know the story. I don't tell the story to friends. I've had friends since the book come out, with tears in their eyes, tell me like, I had no idea you went through all this. And I was like, I stopped talking about it when I was about 12. Cause you get sick of telling people these things that sound so crazy, and you want your life to be about other things. You want to be able to choose your own destiny, and you want to be able to have your own sort of, approach to the world. So, that was, and then at one point the book starts with our escape, and much of the book isn't really instant on. I didn't spend much time there. We left when I was about 4, and it's mostly, the book's about childhood and whatnot, but it sort of starts with this moment of escape. And this woman shows up with shaved head. She's like, I'm your mom, and we live on the run for a while. We escape the cult, and then they send goons looking for us, and we have to kind of dodge and weave, and we're not allowed outside because they're worried the bad men are gonna come and steal us away. Yeah. And then at one point they do. They show up, the bad men from the cult in mass and clubs, and they beat our roommate nearly to death. And it's one of my earliest memories. It happened 5 feet in front of me. My brother watched from across the street. So it was, I guess in this way, it was like this devolution of this really high-minded idea that kind of devolved into madness, which is what happens in cults. Yeah. I mean, the people consolidate power, and anyone who doesn't agree with the leader becomes a heretic, and they're cast out, and it always, goes towards violence. And, who has it said, all plots end in death? It's sort of like that.
And as you're talking about it, we on this podcast, I also interviewed Stephen Hassan, who has a book about the political cult that a lot of people interpret the Trump movement to be. So it's interesting to hear people talk about it. And he was also his family. He was caught up in a cult as well as a young man. So it's interesting when I hear those buzzwords, about the way that, you become an out-group member if you're an in-group member and all of that. It is a little eerie, but the early part of it, and I wonder how, having been through childhood separation, essentially, yourself, when this was happening in the real world, what was that like for you to see this
huge.
happening in the country?
Well, so first of all, I just had so much empathy for these kids. I mean, I listened to, what was it? Was it ProPublica? There was this audio that came out of one of the detention centers, and you hear this little girl, maybe it's two sisters, being taken away from their parents, and she goes, "Mommy," and they're crying. And then you hear these immigration officers kind of, I think they were actually in Spanish, kind of making fun of them for it. And then you read all these accounts of child psychologists who are like, this is abuse, this is neglect, this causes brain damage, this is horrible for these kids. And there was this awkward moment, I think, among these sort of ex-Synanon people. Synanon people are, for lack of a better word, leftists, mostly. By and large, they're progressives. They see themselves as, pretty far left. They're kind of granola-y, kind of hippie-ish, not fully like that, but they're, that's kind of who they are. And there's this really awkward moment where you see all these people saying, adamantly anti-Trump, adamantly anti-child separation. And then a lot of us who are the kids in Synanon, this is our parents' generation, and we're talking to them going, yeah, that's bad, right? Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's different. I'm a white guy, I have white privilege and all that. And, I'm not a kid from El Salvador, in a new country. And so politically it's very different, but emotionally, it's exactly the same. Well, you don't have parents. We were orphans, and you just feel sad. It's just hard to kind of go through that and to feel the stress of that. And a lot of the book is kind of slowly piecing that together, because the book is written from the perspective of a child, at least the first 2/3 of it. Slowly piecing together his world, which is what I was doing at that point in my life, like trying to piece together, like, wait, if this happened, that means this happened. That means this was a lie. That means this wasn't true. And I think a lot of that happens with people growing up, that you're as you become an adult, you kind of start to piece together some of especially if you had some traumatic events happen to you, you piece together some of the lies you were told, and you start to kind of question the narratives that people gave you.
And you, at some point, you're living with your mom, and then you are actually living with your dad. Can you walk us through those films? Because as you said, some of the most heartbreaking videos, and I think these were also ProPublica videos, of some of the kids when they then go back to the parent. They don't want to go to them. They resist them. And the mothers are crying and saying, I'm your mom, in Spanish, I'm your mom. And they're like rejecting, because you don't really know what happened in those moments, being between your mom and your dad. How did you feel about them?
It was hard. We were very vulnerable as a kid. And it hit me more when I became a parent. I think it was one of the sort of eye-opening moments of my life. And, I got married. I met my wife, who's like my best friend and soulmate, and we had a beautiful wedding, and we started with all these high hopes, and then we have our kid and our son, and we love him so much, and he cries, and we pick him up 10 times a day, 20 times a day, like he's a kid. And at 6 months old, it hit me like, this is the age they thought we were old enough to be given to strangers. And I thought, what a horribly traumatizing, awful, terrible thing to do. How hard that would be on me, how hard that would be on him if we were to do that. And so how was it? It was extremely confusing, and extremely, you spend a lot of your life just wondering, like, you're kind of looking in from a window at families and wondering what they are, and you're kind of like, wow, look at the way the mom talks to the son, and that's what a mom is, far out. Look at the way the dad talks to the daughter, so that's okay. And you're just sort of like making up. And especially if you're someone like me, who, my response to this stress of this situation was to become this like super overachiever kid, right? Like different kids respond in different ways. My brother was a rebel, what they call a scapegoat child. I was like, I'm gonna fix it. I'm going to become a star standout student and a star standout athlete. And I'm going to make breakfast for everyone. And I'm going to do 5 hours of chores a day. And I'm going to just try and, that was my way of trying to deal with it. And so a lot of it was me just trying to make it up. And then it was a certain point in my life when I realized I'd been living behind this mask for 20 years. And that was when I realized what the book was about. It was about this unmasking.
What did your family think about the idea of you writing all of this down and letting us read it?
They were scared.
Yeah.
They were nervous. The person I was most nervous about was my brother, because so much, the book's also about his devolution into addiction and heroin and crack addiction. And then I won't give away the ending with like where kind of all the different things that happen. But I didn't tell him that he was so central, and that the vagaries and the details of his life were so central to all this. And so when it was done, I said, all right, Tone, so I've been writing this book. All right, well, I need you to read it. So I gave it to him, and we spent 2 days, and he read it, and he called me over to the house, and he said, listen, I know this doesn't always make me look good, but it doesn't make you always look good either. And he's like, but it all happened, and it's true. And so he said, I wouldn't change a word. He's like, maybe this will help people. Maybe, this story is one where you can find yourself in, even if you haven't been through precisely the kinds of things we've been through. And he was just as large-hearted and generous as he possibly could have been, was just totally, totally fine with it. And I always respect the story. Gave me a lot of empathy for my brother when because a lot of things that I went through, I realized he went through even worse. I mean, he was in an orphanage the first 7 years of his life.
That's
and then
wild.
We left, and nobody said, hey, you were in an orphanage, maybe you'll deal with that. We never saw a therapist. No one ever even asked us how it felt for us, what this experience was like. And so to try to piece it together as adults, when we get into our 20s and we feel like these kind of broken men. Yeah. And it's like, why? Well, I mean, we have attachment disorders. We have trouble. We fear relationships. Like, of course we do.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
We were orphans.
Yeah.
And we'd never sort of talked about it. And I think for me, I was just trying to swim, my way through it. I was just I can out-achieve it. I'll be the best runner in the city of Los Angeles. I'll be all Pac-10 at Stanford. I'll graduate with honors from an elite university. I can out-achieve everything. And then you get to a certain point where you realize that isn't enough. Richard Wright talks about this in one of the sort of I talk about this in the book a little bit, but about living behind a mask. And for him, it's, Jim Crow America and the mask he has to put on because of surrounded on all sides by white supremacy. But the part of it, the emotional part of just living behind this mask, of having to present a face to the world, always spoke to me so deeply, because I just felt like I spent my whole life behind a mask. And I think everyone does that to some extent. You invent a persona for people. You emphasize certain events. You kind of de-emphasize others. And I would do that. I would sort of skip around and not talk about certain parts of my life. And writing the book was like owning, well, this is my story. Yeah. This is who I am. And I want to give this child a voice, because he never had a voice. And it's hard. It's hard for me, because my instinct is to want to, seem invincible, seem larger than life, seem like I have it all handled. That's where my instincts always are. And not talk about some of the really difficult things that I talk about in the book that actually happened and how it actually felt.
So how has this, the way that you were raised, as you said, the things you did to compensate for it, how has that impacted you as a parent?
Oh, man. I think I'm just so protective. So we have a daughter now too. Yeah. And she spent the first month of her life being sick, and was actually in the hospital with double pneumonia early on. It wasn't COVID, it was RSV. Which is, a thing that infants can get. And so we were at Children's Hospital at the start of the COVID epidemic. And my wife and I were there 24 hours a day, trading off between the two kids. And there was just this feeling of I have to protect these lives. I have to protect this child. I'm not important. I'm here to be, the protector. I'm here to provide. I'm here to give love. And the other thing, which is something I learned from my dad. And I think my dad is this unlikely hero in my life, because I was always told early on what a cad he was. He was kind of this swashbuckling pirate, this charming 1 foot in front of the law kind of guy. And I'd always been told what a lowlife he was. And then when I got to know him, he was this great guy, just warm and wise and just so easy to talk to, and just took people as they came. And he taught me also, one of the sort of basics of parenting is just taking joy in your kids, taking just joy in their existence. And I think that's one of like the main things when it comes to me and my kids. I just like to take joy in that they're alive. And I kind of hope they achieve good things in their lives, but also I just kind of hope they're around.
Yeah.
I hope that they know we love them, and I hope they can always come to our house for, Christmas or just whatever it is, and always maybe see them. I hope they don't move away. They hope to stay in Los Angeles, and we can all get together on Sundays and crack jokes and just take joy in one another's lives. And that's a big part of what my dad and my mom Bonnie, who's my stepmom, but we don't use the S word in my family. My mom Bonnie, what they sort of taught me about family. And a lot of this book is kind of me trying to let the reader in on the search for family, like what it meant to go from being this person that's kind of like looking in from the outside to somebody who really embraces family, who originally thinks, oh, this is not something I'm ever going to be able to do, to be this like a husband and a father and all these things, to somebody who that's what I live for. That's like nothing is more important than I don't care about any of this. I don't care about any of this other stuff. My kids, my wife, that's the center of my life. Well, it feels good. It's a good place to be.
Well, lucky for you, now that we're in the Armageddon, your kids will never leave your house. They'll live with you forever and ever and ever.
Every day. Every day. I'm just saying, no. We have a 3-year-old. It's like, no, Dad, no. Want to do this? No. Want to do that? No.
Nope. Yep, exactly.
Like,
learning to homeschool. 101.
And you're like, remember to take joy. Remember to take joy.
It's a mantra. You'll learn to meditate in this era too.
That's right. That's right.
And what about this? What about this pandemic? Because you have this book out, and you're right. You're doing a book tour. It is a pandemic. What do you think has changed? Because it does, and I hate to go back to that again. We don't want to use too much of the T word here, but it does feel like we're living in an era when millions and millions of people are caught up in a belief system that doesn't benefit them, and that in many ways could kill them, right? Because COVID 100%. Is real. It
100%.
Is,
I think that I'm obviously a very go ahead.
No, I'm saying, do you relate to that at all? Because the reality is that millions of people do get caught up, whether it's a religious personality cult or a, as you said, this was a drug treatment cult. There are all kinds of belief systems that can capture people who seem to be otherwise quite intelligent and well-meaning, but it's easy to get caught up. Do you see it that way? That it's as easy to get caught up in the
100%.
Trump of cult?
100%. I am a very, as you know, vocal Trump critic of the racism, the misogyny, the idiocy, the corruption, all of it. I am well on record.
Yes.
I don't hate Trump supporters though. I'm furious with them in the way that I'm furious with anyone who's harming others. And I can't help but be very, very angry as is well documented.
Yes.
Sometimes I need to clear my language. I haven't tweeted much in the last month or two because I'm just so mad. Every time I compose something and it's like, listen, you little, and then I'm like, all right, I can't just have that be my energy in the world. I got to find a better way.
Put it in drafts. You'll feel better. Yeah.
Right. Put it in drafts. Let it sit.
I have so much in drafts. Oh my God, Mikel, if you read my drafts,
I know, because you just get too caught. You're just too mad. It's just too overwhelming. And I'm so angry.
You can't hit send.
I will say this though, you've got a lot of people who everywhere they go, Fox News is on. It's on in the dentist office. It's on at home. You get in the car and right-wing radio is on. And then on Sunday from the pulpit, you're hearing a lot of the same messages. Large swaths of this country. I can still be angry with them and also understand they are victims of misinformation. Both those things are true. And I think to just dismiss that outright and say, well, these are just people that don't care about lives of people at all. That's definitely true for some people. But I think for the vast majority of it, they're literally living in an information bubble that is toxic and it should be illegal. I mean, there's a reason why, what was it, 1982? What was the act, that Reagan repealed so that Fox News could basically exist? Propaganda could call itself news.
No more equal time.
What's that?
No, basically, that we're mandated equal time.
Right.
Yeah.
So, 40 years ago, Fox News couldn't call itself Fox News. It could call itself Fox, but and so you have this massive, well-heeled propaganda arm lying to people every day, lying to them. And there's this alternate, reality. So I feel like it misunderstands people to just simply say that's, all it is. Now, I also think, as activists have pointed out, which I fully agree with, and I consider myself an activist, is the anger is useful. The anger is appropriate. The anger causes change. Righteous anger, properly applied, is for real. And I think just acquiescing and saying, oh, well, they're just victims, so let's not hold them accountable is not the right approach. When somebody hits you, they need to see your anger.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what they're doing. They're hitting women. They're hitting on race issues. They're hitting on religious issues. They're hitting on class issues. They're actually endangering lives. They're killing people. That deserves real, intense, righteous anger. It is also true that there's a systemic problem with propaganda, and it's very important that that's something that be addressed. And I think the best thing that could possibly happen, the most toxic force in public life is Fox News, and it's if you took Fox News away and didn't change the law, something else would fill its place, maybe OAN or something. But that's actually, and that is the sort of information control aspect of a cult. And that's something that's very common in cults. You see it in in the Korean War when they had the communist re-education camps. You just give someone a message all day, every day, have them repeat that message all day, every day, and then they start to believe it. That's just psychology. So you can't just ignore that and say, they're terrible people. What they're doing is terrible and they need anger, but you also need to address the systemic problem or else it's not going to change. And that's what we want. We want it to change.
Does Synanon still exist?
No. It did until I think it in some form or another existed until like the late 80s. But at that point it was just totally bonkers. I mean, they were drinking again, using drugs, having parties. Like it was just full on, had nothing to do with what it started.
And when your parents ended their relationship with it, what did that do to them? Because a lot of people do experience a depression after separating from a cult.
Yeah, my mom was severely depressed. She, as I write about in the book, she struggled with depression and mental illness issues her whole life. And I think, she was penniless, and she'd gone through a divorce, and she had no friends, and, and also the society that she had put so much into crumbled into madness. And, insult to injury, Reagan, her old foe when he was governor from the free speech era in Berkeley, is now president. And the feeling was like the hippies lost. There was a feeling. It was like the hippies lost. And you have to remember at this time, and a lot of this book is set in like the early 80s, Vietnam was still a big part of our culture. There were still vets on the streets, a lot of homeless vets. They were kicking them out of the mental institutions because Reagan closed all the mental institutions. So you have this huge homeless problem on top of this huge mental health problem. And here she is in this her idealistic society tumbles into madness, and we're living on the run. We're on food stamps, going to the food bank at the church to get our block of government cheese that we lived on. And then eventually we raised, vegetables and fruits, and we raised rabbits for meat. Yeah. And, it all just kind of fell apart. And so we went to hide in the rain. That was the feeling. We went to hide in the Oregon rain because the hippies lost. And also, again, none of these were my decisions. I've always been a little leery of all my parents' political sort of views. I am by nature a more institutionalist. I'm more like Obama. I think that's like, I'm like an Obama Democrat, like right. Generation X. Yeah. I've read this about Generation X. Like the boomers are a little too like head in the sky. They're going to believe like kind of whatever. And we're much more practical. And that's kind of who Obama was. That's probably the biggest critique you could make of Obama, even though I'll defend that man to the day I die because I love him. But that there's a kind of like, well, what works? What's practical? Right. In some cases, institutions really work. Let's go work those institutions. Let's become successful within them, and then let's go try and change them. And that's probably more my orientation. Whereas I think my parents, that Synanon people, were more like the hard left kind of like, let's burn everything down Boomers, kind of people. And that's just never been who I am. Well, I don't trust it. I don't trust when people believe things too hard.
And you can't listen.
Hey, we need to reflect.
Boomers, the 60s era boomers gave us the civil rights movement. They did do that. But then they also gave us all of the destruction of the Reagan era. Right. Generation X gave the world hip hop and Facebook and the internet. You're welcome. Generation X is the greatest generation. Okay, World War II is the greatest generation. We're the next greatest generation. X. It's the generation of Obama.
I read somewhere that we're the caretakers.
We're
like the ones. We're like taking care of our parents. Right. We're taking care of the kids. We're trying to make sure everyone gets along. We're just running around. We're the latchkey kids. The other thing I said is like we're the worst raised generation in history. Like, I don't know about you. Yes. When I was 8, it was like be home by the time the lights come on in the street.
Hello.
And that was it.
That was it.
Just go raise
Mom
yourself.
will be home by dinner. Make sure dinner is ready when she gets there, because we're making dinner. Like in the 6th grade, I had to take care of my little brother. I had a key around my neck. You had to tuck it in. Remember, you had to tuck the key in.
Yeah, you had to tuck the key in. So I knew.
You can't get in. You have to climb. I had to climb my window once because I lost my key. I had to break in my own house. I mean,
absolutely. And it was fine. It was considered fun. That is illegal. I mean, I think they've gone too far, by the way. It shouldn't be illegal, but it's illegal. If you see an 8-year-old walking down the street, and like your parents can get arrested at this point, which again, that might be too far. But
we
like,
were home watching Star Trek, and we were fine. We were raised by Captain Kirk, as every good person should be, because Captain Kirk was right about 99% of
Greatest American hero, the A-Team.
Yes.
These were my parents.
Okay, I have to ask you a question. You're also a member of the Greatest Generation. Sorry, Greatest Generation, the second greatest generation, Generation X. What were your thoughts? I know I'm going to go back to the book in a second. But your thoughts on the Dukes of Hazzard? Because I got to tell you, as a black girl growing up in Denver, Colorado, everyone I know watched the Dukes of Hazzard. We didn't think anything of it. My parents were immigrants, so they didn't know the significance of the Confederate flag. So we didn't even think about it. Did you even know? Did that occur to you? I didn't know.
I had no idea. I was raised in, like, I started in this super idealistic cult, which was, by the way, like, Synanon was like half black. And there's so many mixed kids that are like Jewish and black, like all my peers that are like cousins or brothers, they're all like half Jewish, half, and we're all just like, I don't know, the world is so that's where we came from. And then we get into this society, and you watch like Dukes of Hazzard. All I knew was it was cool when the car, it was like Knight Rider, where like they always figured out a way for the car to jump something. And that was like, as a kid, that's the coolest thing, man. You're like, oh, when are they going to have them jump over? And it's like some hay bale, and there's the Roscoe Pico. Like, I didn't know what the Confederate flag was. I was 7. Like, how could I possibly know? I feel like we're only just now as a country really reckoning with what the Confederate
100%.
flag really was.
Yeah,
I think growing up, we just thought, oh, that's some Southern thing. I don't really know. We didn't know. How could we know?
My brother had the car. Like, my brother actually had the toy. We didn't know that.
Oh, he had the toy, not the Cosmic. He had a GTO.
No,
was it a GTO?
He was a little kid. He was a little kid, and he wanted it for Christmas one year. He got the little car. And we had literally a Confederate flag in my house, little black kid driving around the car. Sorry, I threw my brother under the bus. But yes, he had the car because he wanted it for Christmas. We didn't know. We were kids.
I know. We didn't know. We didn't know.
But this book
is a normalization of these things, though. I think I write about this a little bit in the book. There's a chapter called Normal. And in Oregon, we're still kind of on the run. And I remember I got to school in 6th grade. I go to Orville Wright Junior High School in LA. Orville Wright is to the feeder school for Westchester High. I don't know if you know about LA culture. Westchester is the Westchester Comets. Westchester Comets basketball is famously the best basketball team in the state. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And there was like 8 white kids. And I remember getting there and being like, oh, okay, I guess this is what this is. And the white kids that I met, some of them were pretty racist. And I had never even heard this stuff. It was formed. People had to explain to me what it was. Yeah. And I think it's just, it's that old trope, you have to be taught racism.
That's right.
But it was like patiently explained to me by other white kids. Here's what's bad with Mexican people. Here's what's bad with what they called Orientals. Here's what's bad with, like, we didn't even know.
Did you ever meet a Stephen Miller?
I'd never even heard these things before. They was foreign. I was like, that can't be right.
Yeah. Well, so then you probably met some Stephen Millers. You might have even met him. Let me ask you my final question for you, because he was raised in California, which I always find shocking.
He went to Samo. There's that famous speech of him talking at Samo High about like the janitorial staff being immigrants, and he's just like this entitled little snot-nosed little shit you just want to punch.
I think people did punch him, and maybe that's
the anger. I gotta chill out.
But you have to assume that he was probably punched in the face many times because he's really an angry young person.
Or he's just like a privileged little shit. Like there's plenty of white people that are just privileged. They don't understand their privilege and are just mediocre, and they're defending their mediocrity. Like, think about it. He wants to be an intellectual. No intellectual will take that mediocre of a mind seriously. So he assumes there must be something wrong with the society for rejecting him, as opposed to just, no, dude, you're stupid.
Well, he's got a nice, very important job and a wife, and somebody loves him, I guess. Let's move on to my final question that I love to ask authors on this podcast. What do you like to read? What do you read? What are you reading?
Oh man, I read everything. So in writing this book, I have this big bookshelf up here, like you guys can't see, I guess, but I read about 150 books in the process, because my process is to write for 5 hours and then take some time off for lunch and then to read for 4 hours. And I can't write unless I'm reading. So I read all the memoirs, all the sort of classic memoirs. This Boy's Life, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Year of Magical Thinking. And then I would write essays about them, Angela's Ashes, just sort of for myself. Like, here's what they're doing. Here's why this is working. Here's why this isn't working. And then I read a lot of fiction. All the Jonathan Franzen books I love. He's just he makes great sentences. Jeffrey Eugenides' Middlesex was amazing. Underground Railroad. But the two biggest books for me were probably Beloved. I came to Toni Morrison late in life.
Don't even tell me that you like my favorite author. Don't even start. Are we the same person? What?
She's my favorite author.
She's my favorite author. She's actually my favorite
like Roger Federer or like Michael Jordan. No holes in her game.
Oh my God.
She's a great intellectual who's a great storyteller, who's emotional, who's mysterious. She can do all the stuff.
And uses all the words. I used to have to read her books with a dictionary on the side, and that was my favorite kind of reading. I got to look up half these words.
I mean, I went through a whole phase where I would just watch Toni Morrison interviews to think about, like, okay, here's how she talks about books. Okay, this is cool.
Oh my God.
But like, Beloved changed, it was just, that book was like so good. It was the first time I really got a visceral emotional sense of slavery as the emotional trauma. Because you know it as a historical artifact, and you know it as something to hate and to loathe and awful, but the like actual emotional trauma that family went through, and
absolutely.
And what set they felt for her daughter, the relationships between the family members, where you really get a visceral sense, and she's willing to probe these interior things, and then she'll just go be confusing for a while, like when Beloved just has the chapters where she's just talking, and she kind of has faith that a reader's going to catch up.
They're going to figure it out. Yeah.
And it's just so beautiful and sad and tragic and inspiring. And I think I read that book 3 times.
Oh my God.
While writing my book, and I quote the book at the start of my book as well.
That is wild. My favorite of her books is Song of Solomon. It's my favorite book of all time. I absolutely love it. And you're great. Mikel Jollett. You have a beautiful name too. Very interesting name.
Thank you.
The way it's spelled, it could be Joyette, or it could be Joyette.
Yeah.
How do you like to pronounce it?
We think an E was dropped maybe. There's a part of the family that goes by Jollett. Okay. And they think there was an E at the end originally, but at Ellis Island at some point they lost an E. Then my dad goes by Jollett. Yeah. Because he was trying to impress a girl once in high school, and he told her his name was Jim Jollett, but then he just went by Jim Jollett from then on. So I've just always been Mikel Jollett because that's what my dad was. Yeah. And it feels kind of like Jollett behavior, like I'm gonna change my whole name just to impress a girl. Okay, that's something I can get behind. I understand that.
Well, my maiden name is Lomena, and they used to call us Lomina, and so I've been Lomina and Lomena. So I love I like a complicated last name.
That's French African.
It's Congolese. It's Congolese. Yeah. The original was Lomena beautiful. Panga, so we go by Lomena. But I
Lomena.
Lomena. That I'm the tribe Lomena. That is me. Mikel Jollett, you're amazing. You like good books. You write good books. This is the book. I'm going to show it again for all the folks on YouTube. Hollywood Park. This book is getting huge rave reviews. So I feel very, very lucky that you took some time to talk to me today. Thank you.
Well, it was wonderful to talk to you. This was really great. And thank you so much for having me. It means a lot. Of course.
Good luck with the book, and good luck with the virtual book tour. They're actually a lot of fun. So this is cool. Thank you so much for doing this.
All right. Thank you. Talk soon.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Mikel Jollett, awesome, fascinating interview, right?
That was a great interview. It was
very
interesting.
His story is so fascinating, and I'm really glad that Twitter brought us together, because this is one of those situations where
another Twitter meeting.
Oh my God, you can meet the coolest people on Twitter. Hollywood Park is the book. It's a memoir by Mikel, who is also a great Twitter follow. You should follow him on Twitter as well. And I love the fact that we both love Toni Morrison and Russian novels. We're both latchkey kids, former latchkey kids who love the exact same kind of books, which is awesome, which is one of the great things you find out on What to Read. You find out not just what our books are about, but also what our wonderful guests love to read. That's what we bring you, because we love you and we care. Message, we care.
Let's subscribe, everybody.
Please do subscribe. If you're watching this here podcast on the YouTubes, please hit the subscribe button. It's just like a little bell. Just
The
ding.
notification bell.
It's a notification bell. I never
guess
remember what to call it.
everybody on podcast knows that I have to remind you it's a notification.
I never
bell.
remember what it's called. But if
Notification bell.
But you should also subscribe if you
Yes.
are listening to this. And
Yes.
I finally, I usually review them by watching the YouTube, but now I've been really I really enjoy listening to it without the video and just listening to it on Apple Podcasts. That's where I normally
There
listen
you
to
go.
it. But you can also.
It is a podcast.
It is a podcast. So you can just listen to it. And I'm fascinated by listening to it. It's interesting hearing the people.
Visual is just another element of the podcast.
Absolutely. So wherever you get your podcast, you can get it there. Spotify also has it. It's now caught up. Everybody who's been texting me and tweeting me about they can't catch it, you can find it now. It's all there.
Also, there's a direct link in the description below, so you can get the direct link from there.
Perfect. All right, so everybody can be caught up. You never want to miss an episode because they're so good. All right, guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next What To Reid.
Bye, fam.
Goodbye.